Good evening, and welcome to this virtual meeting of the Board of Education. I am the Board President, Michelle Corcadell. This meeting is being televised live on AACPS TV and streamed live on AACPS YouTube channel. If we're interrupted during the broadcast of tonight's meeting, the meeting will be stopped and we will take a short recess until we can continue. For some reason we cannot continue, we will notify you as soon as possible when a new meeting will be scheduled. The Board Attorney has asked that I read the following statement. The Maryland Open Meetings Act, a state law, requires public meetings be open to the public and to be held in reasonably accessible places to individuals who would like to attend these meetings. The virtual format of this meeting, the Board of Education, is due to the COVID-19 emergency and is necessary in light of the serious health risk associated with public gatherings, as well as the governor's and county executives' various executive orders limiting public gatherings. While a virtual meeting of this type was not envisioned by the Open Meetings Act, steps have been taken to ensure that this virtual meeting includes alternate accessibility features that the Open Meeting Act's Compliance Board and the courts have reviewed and approved, that broadcasting the meeting with video and audio on cable TV and on the web, and allowing written public comments to agenda items to be filed with the Board of Office and considered by the Board. The Board Attorney has opined that the public access provided by this technology makes this virtual meeting reasonably accessible to the public and provides the opportunity to observe the conduct of the Board's public business consistent with prevailing best practices during this emergency situation and therefore complies with the Open Meetings Act. Please now pause for the invocation followed by the Pledge of Allegiance. O God, we pray to administer that which is just in all educational policies, being ever mindful of your guidance, stir us to action with love, wisdom, and understanding. And now for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item 1.03 is establish the agenda order. Do I have a motion or consensus to proceed with the agenda as published?
So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we have any differences of opinion that would forward a consensus? Seeing none, the board is in consensus to now proceed. We will next start off with roll call order. Mr. Smith.
Here.
Ms. Ellis.
Here.
Mr. Grannon. Hopefully he can join us later on. Ms. Schallheim.
Here.
Ms. Antwine.
Here.
Mr. Gilliland.
Here.
Mr. Live.
Here.
And Ms. Hummer will be joining us in a couple minutes. Thank you all so very much. Without any further ado, I want to thank Dr. Kaliyaraman for joining us this evening as in a last minute request and invitation to discuss our upcoming special session. So I'm going to turn this over to Dr. Alato and Dr. Kay so that we can get some additional information. And then I know that Dr. Kay is very time limited this evening. And so as soon as we're able to, we'll open up to questions by board members to him and then resume in appropriate order. Gentlemen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam President. I appreciate, as always, the board taking time with us. The subject tonight is athletics and extracurriculars and co-curriculars. Before we get to our presentation, I do want to, and thank you for already recognizing Dr. Kaliyaraman, spending some time with us. I think we'll start with him. Before we do that, just so the board knows, we do have the usual suspects joining us in this evening's meeting, and that's Dr. McMahon and Mrs. Jackson. But we are also joined by Dr. Lucarelli, who is our Associate Superintendent for School Performance, and she oversees athletics, and Mr. Clayton Culp, who's our supervisor, our coordinator of athletics. So he oversees all of those programs, including some of the co-curriculars that occur at school. So they've joined us for tonight's meeting. Before we get started with Dr. K, I think it's appropriate just to say happy birthday to Mr. Smith. I know he's delighted to spend his birthday evening with us in such an important topic, but happy birthday nonetheless. So thanks, Mr. Smith. So with that, Dr. Kay,
On that note, I do believe Mr. Smith may need to depart for a couple minutes, and so and he will be rejoining us. Correct, sir? To that effort. You may proceed, sir.
So thank you. Before I get into my comments and presentation, then of course I'm sure the bulk of the evening will be questions by the board. I'd like to respect Dr. Kalyanarana's time, and so if there are, if he has some opening comments about extracurricular activities, athletics and the like, I'd love for him to share those at that time. Then I'm sure he's willing to take a couple of questions before he has to get off to his next appointment by, I think he said 6:30. So we've got about 15 minutes with him. So Dr. Kay.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. And I really want to just make a few comments, and then I'm happy to take questions. We certainly talked last night about our guidance regarding school reopening and the parameters that make it possible. One of the things that I talked about is that we assumed that reopening in school learning is prioritized over reopening extracurricular activities, and that, of course, includes athletics. And the reason we said that is that there's a couple of reasons to that. One is from a practical level, the more activities that we open in our county, and that certainly includes sports, the more opportunities there are for spread, increasing our case rate, and the harder it makes for school reopening. I have been consistently saying that for months and frankly since the beginning of the pandemic, and it doesn't really change because of the type of activity. And I think that's probably one of the most important things to recognize is that our recommendations really, while we recognize that different people have different preferences for which activities open, the virus really doesn't take into account intent. It simply tracks along activity lines, and so that's why we say that we assumed that extracurriculars were not open prior to school reopening for that reason. The second is that we have seen from sports that are being done in the rec leagues. Absolutely, we've seen cases and quarantines of teams. That's a consideration, and from our standpoint, we have to consider the impact that has on our ability once again to both get schools open and to keep them open as well. I know one question that comes up, and I'm going to answer it up front, is why not school sports? Why rec leagues? And from our standpoint, the school system, and so while this is certainly your choice, we focused on the educational piece of the school system because that is the thing that it can do that no others can. Whereas for rec leagues, their function is to provide a sports league. And so it's more a question of what comes first and not whether or not something happens. So I'm gonna leave it there. I'm happy to take questions or to yield to Dr. Arlotto to share his presentation. I'm not sure the order, but I will stop there.
Thank you, sir. I think questions will probably be most appropriate. So I don't have anyone that is dialed in, board members at this time. So everybody should be able to do a hand raise. I do see a couple. Okay, I'm seeing more than a couple. So let's just keep it. We're going to have to keep it to one question tonight, not two. And we'll do a very quick round robin, starting with Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith.
Thank you. And Dr. Arlotto, thank you for the birthday wishes. I want to thank everybody for the birthday wishes. So my first question, my only question is, has to do with indoor sports. Are those okayed? I know with summer sports, I know football, baseball, those, and soccer was all okayed. I didn't really hear anything in the county about indoor basketball. So my question has to do, can we proceed with practices or games really with basketball, wrestling, cheerleading, a dance company, or volleyball, any indoor sports?
So this comes down to it's a question of risk. And so sports are classified by risk level based on the amount of person-to-person contact there is. Maryland Sports, oh, forgive me for forgetting the acronym, but it's the Maryland Sports Commission classified sports by risk level, and certainly being indoors increases that risk generally. And so that's really more a question of what risk level are we are we comfortable with handling? Our general recommendation at this time, given our case rate, was to, and it's actually what the governor put out, I think a week ago, was that if high-risk sports should be played with modifications. An example would be from the late summer when we said that we suggested that football be done as flag football instead of tackle. That decreases the risk level. It's those sort of modifications. They of course change the sport a little bit, but that's the decision that has to be made. Do you want to accept that higher risk level or not?
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ellis?
Thank you. And I had 3 questions, so if I send you an email, Dr. K, will you respond to my other 2?
Sure.
I know.
Hard to prioritize, but this is a big one for me. And this is, I'm asking for your scientist opinion on this. I know the county executive opened performance venues in some limited capacity. So can you explain to me how singing, if a singer were to wear a clear mask, let's say in a performance, is that any riskier than athletes exerting themselves on a field and having contact? Is there any reason scientifically, since we are having entertainment happening in the community, that our students couldn't follow the guidelines and be held to the same standards?
So I think there's a couple of questions in there. One is around singing. So the issue with singing is very specific to the fact that the act of singing projects, if you have COVID, projects those particles much greater distances. That's the nature of singing. And there's really, I'm not aware of anybody saying that they can sing comfortably through a mask. Certainly open to that discussion, but we haven't really heard anybody actually say they want to do that. It's very difficult to make comparisons between, okay, what does it look like to do football or wrestling versus singing? What's the comparator? To be quite honest, it's really going to be difficult to say one is worse than the other. But we see that we've made our recommendations that high-risk sports at this time, we don't recommend they go forward without modifications. We've made our recommendations around singing, and it's high risk, that it's a high-risk activity. I mean, I think at this point we've made it clear what our recommendations are, and if the community feels like they want to go forward with those activities, and we see, I think, the results in that and many other reasons for why our case rate continues to rise.
And just to help me understand, is there going to be singing occurring in Ram's Head or venues like that now that the county executive has opened those venues?
So those venues, those performances, the singing itself, it's a problem, to be quite honest. That's part of what we're trying to sort through is what are the barriers or what are the mitigation efforts to do that. That's largely from the governor moving forward. And I think we also have to, from our standpoint, we also distinguish between who are the people who are going and going to a performance or an event. And I think there's a difference from our standpoint between schools and a commercial venue.
All right, and thank you again for joining us tonight. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. I don't see that Mr. Grannon has had a chance to join us yet. So, Ms. Schallheim?
Thank you again, Dr. Kalanaram, for joining us again twice in 1 week. It's great to see you. I had a comment about the singing, and then I have a question about robotics. I watched many hours of high holiday services via YouTube that had lots of singing with a socially distanced choir, all wearing masks, all outside. They sounded lovely. It can definitely be done. It sounded just the same as it would have if we were in person, and I wish we were. So I wanted to make that comment. It can be done with a mask. But my question is about robotics, and that is obviously these kids have opportunities to access huge scholarships and career and college opportunities and all of the rest. If they just show up to a competition, to do that they need to work on their robots. That generally happens indoors. I don't see it any differently than our CAT North or CAT South students. Do you have an opinion either way on that group specifically?
I think the bigger question that we try to consider is less every specific instance. There's usually mitigating factors that you can put into place. It makes sense. But what we find is that when you add up all of the exceptions, you have a rule that says there's 100 different clubs and sports teams and all sorts of activities that are back. And then the question becomes, that's a lot of activity. What's the impact going to be? So it's not really the impact of any one particular activity or person or group. It's the aggregate effect of all of those activities coming back. Because once you say that one group is coming back, it really doesn't make sense to say another group can't come back. But then you have a lot of activity. And I think that's the question that really should be addressed is how many things are we talking about coming back? And then what is the collective impact of that?
Okay, and if what the priority should be, if any. Hopefully there won't be one prioritized over another. Thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Ms. Schallheim. I greatly appreciate our board's continued brevity and keeping it to one question topic. Ms. Antoine?
Thank you, Mr. Corkadell, and thank you, Dr. Kala Anaraman, for joining us tonight. I have a question about our phases in the county compared to what at the state level they're allowing. I understand the underlying decision maker is unfortunately COVID and its exposure in our county. But as I'm following the guidance through your site, which is excellent, by the way, I'm understanding that many of our sports could continue in different capacities, and that the standard fall and winter sports that are probably considered higher risk would just need additional consideration. So with that said, my question would be, where are we in our phase, and what do you recommend that we continue in our fall and winter sports and extracurricular activities? I would also point out that there's a lot more contact in some of the sports that are quote unquote approved to play at this time than there is in many of our extracurricular activities. So my question would be an understanding about the phase that we're currently in, and what are you recommending that we do at this time, especially considering what Governor Hogan has shared?
Yeah. It's a little bit hard to actually answer the phase question because those were definitions that were put out in April and circumstances have changed. I think the best way to say it, excuse me, is that we see continued community spread, and we see slow but increasing community spread. And that suggests that adding additional activities will only further that community spread. Prior to Governor Hogan's announcement, I guess it was about maybe 2 weeks ago now, in our discussions with Dr. Arlato and between health department staff leadership and AACPS leadership, we were really comfortable with the plan to resume some practices now with a target of competitions in 2021. From our perspective, that plan made a lot of sense and still makes a lot of sense, and that would be our recommendation for going forward.
Thank you very much. Mr. Gilliland?
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Doctor, for being here tonight on less than 24 hours notice. I know Mr. Live was going to ask a question, so I will defer my time. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Lott?
Well, thank you, Mr. Gilliland, but I still get one question. Dr. K, thanks for being here. I appreciate it.
Mm-hmm.
Given that sports have been played in our county by our students throughout the summer and the fall, from youngest age all the way up to 13-year-olds, and for the organized, quote unquote, I guess as not a kind way to put it, the pay to play leagues, where our students join leagues, et cetera, even for some older kids. What health metrics have changed that permits us athletics to be played in our county throughout the summer and into the fall, but now doesn't support athletics being played in our high schools at this time? I don't understand that disconnect. If the situation is fine for students and young people to be athletically involved throughout the summer, I do not understand, how that doesn't continue into the fall, into the high school season. And oh, by the way, I do want to congratulate you. One of our fellow board members, and they may decide to mention it, did a Facebook post about how successful your office has been in contact tracing in the rec leagues, and how effective you've been. So I do want to congratulate you on that and how it's worked. And I just have a hard time coming to grips with that disconnect. Our kids are playing in the summer and fall everywhere in this county. They're traveling to Pennsylvania, they're traveling to Virginia, they're traveling to Delaware, and they're playing in sports. And they're taking a risk, as you say. So what makes that risk so much more that we can't do it here in our own backyard?
So as I was mentioning, a couple of things. One is that we're certainly very aware of the rec leagues, the pay-to-play leagues, as you called it, and their operations. We have been involved in the contact tracing of those leagues, and we've had to do a lot of work to get those leagues to even a place where we can even manage the contact tracing at this point. Our recommendation, as I noted earlier, is really based on the fact that, one, the question of what it takes to reopen schools, we based on the assumption that we wouldn't add additional activities for students, additional cohorts, and additional risks in the school system. That both creates opportunity for additional spread, and it takes additional resources from a contact tracing perspective and from a school system perspective. I understand your point, and at the end of the day, that's your call. We're not prohibiting it. It's your call as to whether you want to prioritize sports first to come back or education to come back first. We've made our recommendation as to which order we think that should go.
Well, that's more or less of a chicken or the egg situation. As you're aware, we had a very interesting evening last night.
Yeah.
And who knows, how that's eventually going to turn out. If you could be on my laptop and my handheld, there are a lot of activity in that regard. So I just see that as a false choice. I don't understand that. And not to be contentious or anything, but it's a bureaucratic thing. It's not a question of whether we can do it or we can't. So anyway, I thank you for your time tonight, and I look forward to seeing athletics in Anne Arundel County High Schools. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Live. Dr. K, do you have time for Ms. Hummer and I to do a quick
sure.
question? Okay, thank you, because I know we're at 6:32 right now. Ms. Hummer?
I have no questions. Thank you.
Okay. I do have a question, and I've been listening very keenly as it relates to some of the preferences of what we could do and preferences, considerations of otherwise. And I just want to ask you, your hybrid grid showing us when we are most comfortable going through for all effective purposes doesn't really have I see as a viable opportunity in the first semester for our high schoolers to return. And we have provisions in our core hybrid that are indicative of making sure that that hybrid time is being best spent to better overall. There's a lot of factors going on with that. Our high schoolers have developed over the course of years opportunities, and without them participating, we're talking about well over probably $100,000 of opportunity that will not be replicated to provide them any college choice at the end of it. And it occurs to me, and it didn't originally, because I got to say, academics before sports and extracurricular does make sense if you're just saying it sight unseen. But when I look at our resources and making sure that we are equally applying opportunities, we cannot provide the direct academic opportunities to our high school students. Why would we not consider elevating these opportunities to give them that equivalency that the small groups and the other things are being provided for in our small groups? In other words, they're at nothing and everybody else has the potential. Right now, it's still potential, obviously. And after last night, definitely. We're talking about potential. But when I'm looking at that bigger picture, why would I not want to provide a portal of opportunity for those high schoolers and consider that perhaps at a higher priority level from your perspective, not from the administrative perspective or even the board perspective? But why would I not consider that based on the reality of nothing occurring formally for our high school students, which is where we're at right now. I'm at 0 minus some cat south and English language learners and special needs. But when I look at that grid, I'm not seeing that opportunity. And for them, it's more important, I believe, these formal things for their future academically. Otherwise, I've got my little trouble on. I'm a very proud band parent, struggling with watching the BSO go back and the London Symphony Orchestra, our local one, London Symphony Orchestra, go back, very well managing the protocols, not seeing any indication that anything awry would be or a massive increase in community spread. That's already been addressed, and I respect that. Please explain to me why that would not be a consideration as it relates to our high schoolers, given the outcomes that we are now seeing in the protocols and matrix.
Yeah, I think that's a great question in the sense that it kind of touches on your expectations of our county's ability and push to get our case rate lower. I understand your point. If you do not believe that we are going to get our case rate down to get high school students in, that's a different consideration. But we had to build our guidelines based on providing a set of advice and guidance and what our inputs were to that. you certainly have to make decisions based on that. And if you don't think we're going to get to opening high school, I understand that. Opening the, whether it's sports or robotics or music or whatever the case may be, from our perspective, and we've had these conversations between health departments, opening them up in that context, we understand, but it also to some degree makes it also less likely that academics can open for high schoolers. So there is a bit of a feedback on that loop. But I get your point, and I think that's your decision to make. For us, this was our guidance, and this was what we had to put into to provide our guidance on what it takes to open classrooms up.
I just I've got to get a definition. I know we're confined to one question, and then this is it for you.
Mm-hmm.
Could you define feedback loop? What is that consequence? What is the consequence of your recommendation or change in your advice that would occur if we were to proceed? How would that change? How would that change my grid? Because it's existing outside of the realm of all the other logistics. How does it change it? Because it's not even occurring at the time of academics.
So our what we see that in general is that activities, as we increase activities in the community, and school is certainly part of our community, depending on just how much of that activity there is, it does slowly but surely increase case rates. And one of the considerations we had to make was, what is the impact of opening school on case rates? Will opening schools, whatever levels we do, increase the case rate in the community and thereby make it harder to keep school open? We had to try to factor that into our decision making. And that's part of why we said we assume that academics opens first before other activities, because we expect those other activities to have some effect on the case rate.
Gotcha.
And make it harder to open to the academics. We don't know the impact. I'm not going to tell you that I know exactly what that number is, but that's just a general principle that we've seen. There are different lines of thought that opening schools really won't appreciably affect case rates. There's others that say that it will have an effect. From our perspective, we wouldn't want to think that school is somehow the exception to everything else until we see that it actually is. Because whenever we open an activity, we see our case rate go up.
Yeah, I guess I'll just end in a comment more than a question, because you've got to go. But the permission of the rec leagues is putting all of our cohorts, all of our future cohorts, particularly at the elementary levels, which is one of our very first come-ins. It would appear to me at almost a higher risk, because it's being reliant on individualized interpretations as opposed to our very robust interpretation and interaction with you. Are you suggesting a reconsideration then, when we do return our cohorts at the lower levels, that they cease this activity in order to ensure that integrity? I just want a clarification on that, I guess.
Yes. So we have been pretty consistent in our statements that one of the things that will help get our case rates down is decreasing our level of activity. That said, we can't really change our recommendation for rec league specifically to get kids in, because that's a separate activity. We could also say that there's a whole host of other activities that kids shouldn't do, right? I think that from our perspective, this is probably one of the hardest places to make decisions, right? Why is this activity, and Mr. Leib noted this, why is this activity allowed? It's allowed, and we're not saying that it is disallowed at the school level. We're simply making a recommendation. We haven't prohibited it. We haven't said no. We haven't said anything of the such. We're simply making a recommendation.
Thank you. Yeah, because obviously they're using the same fields. I'm just going to point that out. But thank you so very much. We clearly have a lot to discuss. moving forward. And I just want to say how appreciative I am. And of taking a couple extra 12 whole extra minutes and clarifying a couple definitions for me clearly. And so thank you once again. And I know that you're in a moving target environment just like we are, even more so. And I just want to say how much I appreciate your continued interaction with Dr. Arlotto and the entire team that we're getting ready to hear from, and your willingness to engage the board members individually, collectively, and continue to carry on. I know for a fact, I have observed how well you do in recognizing our needs and the priorities that education is. You know, education must continue at its best at all times. And I think you guys well said that last night. And to that effort, continuing to carry the banner, because I know you're interfacing with all the other agencies and everybody else, and you're well representing that interest. Even if we do have differences of opinion from time to time, I know that it's there well spent. And so thank you once again, sir. I greatly appreciate it. And I'm sure it sounds like one or two members may be emailing you as a follow-up. So thank you once again, greatly appreciated. I'll let you go. And I'm now, without further ado, we've got a lot of ground to cover here. And so please, Dr. Arlotto, I know you have a few things and updated information to share with the board. And then I will hand it over to you for the Q&A portion, just to work in the interest of efficiency. Mr. Smith did have to step away. He has some guests driving by his house to wish him well. And so I'm going to suggest that he go after Ms. Hummer as opposed to first for this first round, so that he can have a first round of 2 questions that our board has committed to for efficiency and balance of representation. So he'll be coming in last, and we get the second round, probably we'll be able to push him back up to the front again. Thank you very much. It's all yours, Dr. Arlotto.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, members of the board. And of course, I know that Dr. Kay's already signed off, but I do want to thank him for taking time yet again, another one of his evenings to spend some time with us. So let's talk about athletics. Let's talk about extracurriculars and co-curriculars. What I plan this evening, and Bob's going to bring up a couple of slides that will help us with our discussion, is I want to spend a few minutes, if you will allow me, to lay the groundwork so that everybody's operating from the same page. I think it will be important for the members of the board and our community watching and paying very close attention that we lay the groundwork and that we're all operating from the same language and we're operating from the same sheet music, as it were. I want to make sure that that we get off on the right foot in this conversation. So let me talk about the current state of affairs. After we briefly talk about the current state, I am then going to share the basically we have 2 models of implementation of athletics that have been approved by the MPSAA. And we are given the choice, we meaning the local school systems are given the choice. That choice is yours, the board. And so I'm going to lay the basic groundwork. I'm going to review what those 2 options are. I'm going to show you a side-by-side comparison of those options. I'll give you my recommendation, our recommendation from AACPS. And then it will be up to the board to make a decision about which of the 2 choices they want to make going forward with regard to athletics. So, as you well know, we are currently operating in the virtual environment. And so we've asked our co-curricular, extracurricular clubs and activities as quickly as they can to get up and running in a virtual environment. And many of them are doing that currently. We do have middle school intramurals, if you were not aware. They are on hold at this time. And as we get into bringing students back into the buildings, we hope to bring back in some form or fashion our middle school intramurals. High school athletics, which I'm sure will be a big part of the conversation tonight. As you know, we had been preparing and gotten approval from, and I'll talk more about our out-of-season plans in this brief presentation. But the week that, and actually the day that the governor announced a second option, and that he was joined by Dr. Salmon, the state superintendent of schools, the day they mentioned that or gave LEAs that second option to athletics was the day we were going to begin our out-of-season planned practices. I'll talk more about that in a minute. And then it has been discussed by members of our board, high school music, including our bands, dance programs, theater. Many of those have already been actively collaborating with athletics because of the scheduling. So say the band director's been working side by side as we've talked about practices at the high school level, and they've been working with the athletic director to make sure that we don't have too many students in any one area of the school campus when we do, if we do, bring those student athletes and others back onto the campus. So with that, there are two plans that I've referenced. The first is the MPSAA, what they are calling on their website the 2-semester plan. This is a plan that was released on September 11th under the approval of the Maryland Department of Health, PSAM, which is the Public School Superintendents Association of Maryland, Maryland State Department of Education, as well as you can see MPSSAA. And the concept behind the 2-semester plan is that fall and winter seasons were suspended, not canceled, but suspended back on September 11th. And a plan was devised by MPSSAA that would basically take the 3 sports seasons that we have. We have a fall season, we have a winter season, and we have a spring season. And those three seasons would be shifted from typically beginning in August to now beginning in February and ending on June 19th. Obviously, that would truncate to get the 3 seasons in. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. But what that would still allow for a statewide or for countywide and then statewide competitions across the 3 sports seasons. So your fall sports would have a season, your winter sports would have a season, and your spring sports. In this 2-semester plan, it would begin with the winter seasons in February, followed by the fall season, and then concluding the school year through the spring with the spring sports. What was allowed, typically, let me set the stage, is that in a normal, when we're in brick and mortar and we're in a normal school year, we have strict guidelines with our student athletes and coaches. And out of season, what's called out of season practice or play is prohibited. And there are some strict guidance in the out of season. With this plan that was developed by MPSSAA and approved by these groups across the state and released on September 11th, is that the fall, we would be given flexibility in the out of season play rule, which was much applauded by the superintendents across the state, and I know the coaches, because that would have allowed, with no official competitive sports in the fall, that would allow us to start practices with all of our athletes, not just fall athletes, but winter athletes and spring athletes. And we are allowed to develop a plan, which we did and which was approved. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. So this is the beginning of this is the 2-semester plan that was developed and released by the MPSSAA on September 11th. Going forward, as I said, with the relaxation of the out of season rule, it now allowed the local jurisdictions, our school system, to develop a plan which we put together in conjunction with and under the guidance of our Department of Health. And so it was approved by both the Department of Health and the MPSSAA to move forward. And it would focus really on participation, building school community connectedness, and of course the important social, emotional, mental well-being of our student athletes and other students that we can bring back onto campus. We know how important it is, not just the competition, but more importantly, beyond the competition, it's a camaraderie. It's about being with your coaches. It's about being with your teammates. And it's about practicing and getting better at the sport that you love. So again, we developed this plan, as I said, was approved, and under the guidance and direction and leadership of Mr. Clayton Culp. He worked closely with the athletic directors of all of our high schools to develop 3 4-week sessions, one for each of the traditional seasons. So there would be a fall, which we would plan to go from October 19th to November 14th, spring from November 18th to December 19th, and then winter January 4 to January 30. And this would give a chance for student athletes to work with their coaches, work on skills and activities. Of course, there would be no contest. We wouldn't be allowed to have contests because that could put the teams in jeopardy. But we were given permission to begin practices. The concept behind that would be that there would be 2 in-person face-to-face practices and 1 virtual session per week per sport. We were approved to keep groups of 50 together, and that we had planned tracking forms that were approved by the Department of Health for attendance, and that way it would make it easier for contact tracing if necessary. We have safety and sanitation plans in place. Certainly, we would be working with our coaches, and they'd be working with our student athletes. So we had a compensation plan in place. We do have a compensation plan in place, let me say. And we also believe that if a new start date is developed with the 2-semester plan, which is in process right now, and I'll talk a little bit about more of that later, we know that we can quickly modify our out-of-season practice plan. Moving forward, as many of you know, that on September 24th, Dr. Salmon, the state superintendent of schools, and the governor made an announcement that they were going to approve the sports seasons beginning. Although late, we are now allowed and given a choice to begin as early as October 7th and ending on June 19th. And so you see there in that second bullet point on that slide that the sports will be broken down for fall, winter, and spring. And those would be the time periods, 7 weeks, 8 weeks, and 9 weeks, respectively. This plan was built by the MPSAA and then released to the LEAs on the 24th. We believe that if the board so chooses this option, we could get our programs up and running by the 17th. Certainly, when we get to some Q&A, Mr. Culp can talk specifically about what needs to accomplish, but getting our student athletes registered, getting all of our coaches on contract because they're not currently on contract, getting all the appropriate medical forms, for instance, all have to be in place for a Saturday, October 17th start date to our fall athletic season. All programs still have to follow the state rule in COMAR regarding practice days. So whatever day we start or whatever day any LEA starts, any of the school systems start, if they so choose this option, the 20-day rule has not been waived or relaxed. And so there still must be 20 days of practice before the first contest can take place. There is an exception for golf. Because of how they practice and where they play at courses and not on school campuses. But the 20-day practice rule is still in place. And if we do choose this option, much like just as it would be, you would have to picture this option if we were starting on traditionally the August 15th start date, which is many times the traditional day for the start of fall athletics, where there would be tryouts and then cuts so that coaches would get their teams to the appropriate size. So there are 2 options on the table for the board to consider that we've been given by the MPSAA and the Maryland State Superintendent, Dr. Salmon. And here is a side-by-side comparison of what is being called the 2-semester option and the October 7th option. Again, let me reiterate, we would not be ready to go for October 7th. We just, there's too much that has to get put in place, but we believe we can be ready by October 17th. You see the side-by-side. I don't think there's any reason for me to walk you through that. You can see that yourself. I would point out the 4th row down talks about the out-of-season practices. I think there is some belief that if the board chooses the 2-semester option, and we are having fall practices, that the student athletes in some of the, I'm sorry, let me take that back. If the board chooses the October 7th option, that sports that are not they're not fall sports would be allowed to begin some form of practice or conditioning. And that is not the case. If you have to pick one or the other, and you cannot blend the two, we've been told that MPSAA has told LEAs that they must choose one or the other. And there are certainly pros and cons, which I'm sure we'll talk about throughout the evening. So my recommendation is that we stay with the 2-semester plan. It was developed collaboratively, as you know, through a process with all the other counties in the state of Maryland. It gained the support of all the superintendents, as well as the Maryland Department of Health, and of course the MPSAA are the ones that designed it. I believe it better aligns with our system-wide philosophy around a gradual and measured return to school for students and staff, in that we would be able to bring students back onto campus for practices. And of course, we would include band and other activities in that, which I'm sure we'll talk about this evening. But I think it better aligns with our philosophy in implementing slowly but surely and appropriately a return to school, and that would include our extracurricular, co-curriculars, and athletics. And it certainly provides some extended time where in the past we would not get spring sports, for example, any fall practice time. We now would be allowed in this, with this choice, to allow some practice time, 5 weeks worth of practice time in the fall scenario for, say, our spring sports that normally they would not get because it would be an out-of-season violation. Additionally, it really prioritizes, and this was very important for Mr. Culp and the athletic directors, that it prioritizes participation, because the fall practice plan would not involve tryouts yet, because that's part of the overall, those things would have to occur when the official season starts. So we could allow students to participate as they would so choose. And there would not be cuts. It would really be about participation, learning and growing in that sport. Certainly community engagement for those student athletes. That's particularly important, as we know, for our 9th graders that are new to their high school. And certainly the social emotional support, mental well-being of our students. And so we think it would certainly be more inclusive and a relaxed environment. I did say in some earlier comments that the 2-semester rule right now, as designed and approved by the MPSAA, has a start date of February 1, as I said, with condensed seasons of winter sports, fall sports, and then spring sports between February 1st and June 19th. The superintendents, I think, certainly as the board knows, and many may know, superintendents across the state meet every Friday morning. We have for months and months now, through the school closures, to share information, to share best practices. And of course, a hot topic over the last several weeks for us has been athletics, because we are all focused on implementing the 2nd semester plan and our fall practice plan that coincides with that. We had all submitted those plans to be approved by MPSAA, which they all were across all 24 jurisdictions. Then later in September, as you know, the governor and the state superintendent gave us this a second option. So there've been lots of conversations among me and my colleagues. we have requested of the state superintendent to move that start date up from February 1st to December 7th. We have not yet heard anything on an approval of that, but we are all in agreement that if we all follow the second semester plan, the 2-semester plan, that we would request that the start date that be moved up basically 2 months earlier to give longer times for those competitive seasons, longer start and end times. And certainly very importantly for our athletic directors, in the current state, we would, if it's not moved from February 1st earlier to January, and as our request is December, then there could possibly be, or there would be some overlap to use of fields, particularly as the fall sports and the spring sports are overlapping, one ending and one beginning respectively, that could be a concern. So this would give us more time for planning and have longer, though shortened from what they normally are, but would give us longer seasons for each of those winter, beginning with the winter sports, the fall sports, and the spring sports. And finally, this does allow for stakeholders in our programs, our students, coaches, and staff, an opportunity to work with these new set of guidelines and expectations prior to the competitive seasons, as you would. And what I mean by that is by implementing the 2-semester plan and allowing for fall practices, we could get our coaches and student athletes, as well as the other extracurricular participants and their advisors, used to how to work through the health and safety guidelines that would be in place. Masking when they're not on the field in competition or in strenuous activity, washing of their hands frequently, and those kinds of things. It will help us get them reacclimate or get them acclimated to those new protocols that will most likely be in place when we do open our competitive season, whenever that is. So we are, with that, we are glad to begin to take questions. There is a lot to consider, I know, for this board, but the short recap is we have 2 choices, and one is to begin our athletic season, our competitive athletic season, as has been approved by the MPSAA on February 1st, with a possibility of that date moving up to December as requested by the superintendents across the state and supported by 21 of the 24 coordinators of athletics, like Mr. Clayton, his colleagues, his counterparts across all the LEAs they are also supporting the 2nd semester plan with moving that start date up to December. The second option is to begin athletics this fall. Of course, it won't be October 7th because that's tomorrow, but it would be, my guess is, if the board so wants to move in that direction as quickly as we can get our fall sports up and running. And so with that, Madam President, we'll begin to take questions, and I'll start with Miss Ellis. Oh, no, I'm going to start with Mr. Smith because he is back.
Look who's back.
He is back from his birthday celebration. I hope you blew out the candles and the cake was delicious. So, Mr. Smith, we'll start with you.
Great, thanks for that. And it was a surprise, so I didn't know about it until like 2 hours before. So I really appreciate the accommodation. I came right back in the nick of time. So my first question is transportation. How do we get student athletes to and from fields?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We don't have a plan.
Okay.
We'll have to put one together, and that could be very difficult. So, in either of the scenarios, transportation is a concern for me. The minute we start competitive athletics, and I'll use the example, you and I have talked about this, Mr. Smith, you're a baseball player. You're used to finishing school in the spring and then walking down to the locker room, the team room, and changing out and going out to the practice field. That's not an option right now because you're not physically in the school building. So you're going to have to finish your virtual school day. You're going to have to get yourself from home to Meade to get there for practice. In either of these scenarios, but in particular with in the competitive scenario, you'll have to get there for tryouts, and then of course you'll make the team because you're a superstar, and then you'll have to get there for practice each and every day, and then contests. We don't have a transportation schedule established for high school athletes that are at home that need to get to school. We will certainly have a transportation schedule for when we get to competitive athletics, how to get you and your teammates from Meade High School to Arundel High School to play a contest, or from Meade High School to South River High School to play a contest. We will, Mr. Culp and his team in the Department of Athletics will put that schedule together. But you bring up right off the bat, all pun intended, as you're a baseball player, that getting the student athletes back and forth, or any student that is participating in extracurricular, co-curricular activity after school at the high school, I want them to be able to have access. And if they don't have a ride back and forth, that is going to be a problem. So we will, depending on the option the board chooses, and then after, let's say, cuts are made, we'll have to work with individual coaches and athletic directors to see if there's any way that maybe we could provide a couple of activity buses to bring student athletes back. But I don't know that we'd be able to transport 5 days a week all the student athletes on your baseball team, again, to use an example, to get you back and forth to practice. I just don't know how we would be able to schedule that.
Okay, and I guess with that, another thing, I guess the timing you talked about, right after school we'd have practice. I assume that we'd push the practices later in the day, or even the games if we do choose to go that route.
Sure, we'd have to. Yep, we'd have to look at the end of the virtual day and then sort of figure in time for student athletes to change out and get themselves to their high schools. That's more difficult, obviously, if you are attending a high school out of area, meaning you're attending South River High School and you play a sport for South River for STEM, but you don't live in the immediate South River area, right? Or you are at Glen Burnie and you are in the BEMA program. You could live anywhere in the county and attend the BEMA program. And so that is, again, a little tricky, but we'd have to look at that.
Great. And will we be putting together, I guess, a survey to send out to families about your transportation? Like, I can get to school without, school transportation, or I can get from school without school transportation. Will you be putting something like that together?
No, I don't think that we would do that per family. I think, and I'm just thinking out loud, we'd have to sit and plan that out. But I think we would do that sport by sport, team by team. Seems to make more sense to me. So the coach could, and again, I'm going to use the example. If we go into competitive sports this fall, and after the field hockey team at a particular school has been set after tryouts, the coach could meet with the individual players and say, okay, let me know how you're going to be able to get back and forth to practice. And if there are student athletes on that field hockey team that are not able to get back and forth, then maybe we'll be able to work with them in terms of, and each of the schools in terms of finding maybe some central transportation spots for them to access. Mr. Culp, something to add to that?
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto and Mr. Smith, for that question. We've very much been landing on the side of self-transportation for all of the plans right now, with some conversation around what Dr. Arlotto just referenced. But it can't be, from our lens, a one-size-fits-all scenario because of all those variables. So heavily relying on self-transportation.
Great. And I guess my next question has to do with when we actually get the students back on the fields. I guess we're, of course, in our 2-semester option, when we start the practices in the first semester, definitely gonna have practices, but will that then evolve into scrimmages of some kind? Is there any talk later, or at least
It would be certainly inter-squad scrimmages. I don't know if we would be able to put together inter-school scrimmages, but it would certainly involve inter-squad scrimmages.
Okay,
I would assume that a coach would put that together.
Of course, yeah. But would would a coach have the option if he gets together with another coach? Let's say, keeping to your example, my baseball coach at Meade gets together with the baseball coach at Arundel and say, hey, let's put on a scrimmage on Saturday. Would they be able to do that, or would they have that option if
I guess we can discuss it, and I think Mr. Culp has got something to say about that. But based on the previous conversations and much of what we talked about last night, it certainly would increase the risk, right? We talked about cohorts, and if you've got a cohort of a baseball team and then you introduce a cohort of another baseball team, it certainly would introduce more risk into the situation. Mr. Culp?
Yes, thanks again. I would echo that comment. Everything we built, Drake, for these out of season practice scenarios is based on groups staying together and really not mingling with other groups throughout that 4-week period for safety reasons.
Okay, but safety aspect. Let's say the case count gets under 5, right? Let's say sometime in late November the case count is under 5. That'd be great. But would we then be able to put together these scrimmages, since we're talking about risk? Then the risk, in my mind, it seems like it would be going down if the case count gets that low. Or is it just...
we certainly can look at that, but my initial reaction is I think we would want to set the rule and then sort of stick to it so that there is some equal treatment across all the different sports that would have an opportunity to practice.
Thank you, Dr. Arlo. And my last few questions are just actual modifications. Now, I did ask Dr. Kalyana Raman about indoor sports, and he said they would have to be modified. Do we have anything about the modifications? Because I think it would be very hard to keep social distancing in wrestling, but I think something could be done in volleyball. So do we have any specific modifications in mind? Have any plans been put forth?
Yeah. So the basic modifications, so you can't, it would be a very low scoring wrestling match if the wrestlers had to stay 6 feet apart, right? So the sport itself, we can't alter. So when we talk about modifications, it would be volleyball. We can't, it doesn't make any sense to alter the sport such that all the volleyball players stay 6 feet apart, right? But we can make a modification to say when you come off the court, you put a mask on when you're on the sideline. And a modification would be, we're not going to put all the chairs right next to each other on the sideline. We're going to spread you out as much as we can. And we're going to make sure everybody has their own individual water bottle. They're not going to share a water bottle. So those are modifications that we would put in place, because you can't really modify the sport itself. Mr. Culp, is that appropriate?
Okay, great. Those are my questions. Thank you for answering.
Thanks, Mrs. Smith. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. Dr. Arlotto, have you, as we compare these two options for sports seasons, have any colleges been consulted about the impact this may have on athletes who are applying to be athletes on teams at colleges? I'm assuming that there are normal sports seasons going on in some states.
I haven't. Mr. Culp, have you talked to any of your college counterparts?
There have been response to that. There have been some conversation. As you might imagine, it's very fluid because every state, every county is kind of figuring out where they land with this. Yeah. But the concept you're raising is certainly an important one and an impact, no matter how this plays out in terms of that relationship between high school and college athletics, for sure.
Okay, so we just don't know the impact. I'm just curious. I mean,
I would add, Ms. Ellis, that that the majority of athletic programs at the, if not all, but the majority of athletic programs at the Division III level are shut down. They're not operating throughout the fall. Most of the Division I athletic programs, many of those are not operating this fall, or they're operating on a limited basis. Certainly some of the big sports like football is operating. I've seen college volleyball at the Division I level, but there's a number of Division I sports that, or schools that have just shut down some of, not all, but some of their fall sports. But at the Division III level, most, if not all of those are closed. They're not operating at all.
Yeah, I'm aware. I have
my daughter's college.
I have kids at 2 Division III schools. But I just wondered if there's been discussions yet about that application process and how this might impact athletes. Okay, I'm going to turn to other activities. I think we got some good information from Dr. K, where he was balancing the science with what he determined to be, and I'm sure it was based on guidance and conversations with you, as far as what our priorities are. But it's now been determined that the board determines our priorities, and we do know now things that we can do. So if we were moving into a hybrid scenario, but our high school students were not going to be on that timeline, high school students would not be in the classroom for a few months in really any scenario. And also recognizing that the difficulty with cohorting high school students, as we've already addressed, is that every student has a unique schedule, right? So, but activities do create natural cohorts. So could we not explore bringing students together for activities in classrooms in the afternoon that maintain all of the same social distancing guidelines that we're going to use in our classrooms for elementary students?
Yes.
Okay. Quick answer. Great. I like that. And then so right now, I know, can you give us a picture of what is going on right now? What high school students are physically engaging in activities? So you said, I believe some coaches have reached out to students to explore workouts. Is there anything going on yet?
With regard to athletics?
Or any bands or any students?
So I believe the answer with regard to athletics is no, not at this time. And that was, the coaches were holding off for the fall plan to start engaging. And then that's also when their contracts would kick in, and we would start to pay them to do that work. There are other activities that are going on. I think there are a number of, if not all, most of the high school drama clubs are starting to work virtually and thinking about a virtual performance. I understand, Mr. Culp, that the band directors have begun to reach out to their students, and they've begun to do some things virtually in terms of band. And I would suspect, and I don't know because I've not checked all of the clubs, but I think many of the clubs have started some of that work already virtually. They're already, those club activity sponsors are in touch with their students, and those clubs are occurring.
Right. I'm looking at how we can get our students back in person for that much needed social emotional outlet. So I'm very happy and encouraged that those things are taking place virtually, but I want to make sure that it's not being done virtually because it's thought that they're going to take a back seat to our athletes. So once our athletes, once we talk about bringing our athletes together, our performers, we should be looking at bringing them together too, because a virtual environment is not nearly the same. Okay, that's all I have right now. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Scholheim.
Yes, thank you for the presentation and for the information. So I want to make sure I understand the waiver a little bit more. So please correct me if I'm wrong. So basically, if we bail on the 2-semester option and go with the October 7th or 17th or whatever it is option, we squander a waiver to also bring kids together that are not in athletics but in other extracurriculars. Is that what I heard?
No, ma'am.
No. So either way, band and dance and theater and robotics can occur under either model.
Correct.
Okay.
The
And
MPSAA has no oversight over anything but athletics. So their plan only involves athletics. They set the rules for athletics only. So it has no impact on any of the other co-curricular activities.
so regardless of what model we choose, we are still going to view these very important activities in the same light, that we're not going to prioritize athletics over robotics or robotics over athletics or band. They're all equal regardless of which model we choose.
Correct. But there has to be appropriate scheduling.
Yes, of course. And that's a whole nother thing. And are all 24 jurisdictions still in favor of the second semester model? Or the what were you calling that again?
The second semester, yeah, 2-semester model, second semester model, either way. No, not all 24 jurisdictions. My understanding, and Mr. Culp will correct me if I'm wrong, I believe that both Garrett and Allegheny counties are starting their competitive programs this fall, and maybe starting this week. Mr. Culp, am I correct in that?
Yes, thank you for the question. There are 3 counties I'm aware of as of today, Ms. Scholheim. They are Garrett, Allegheny, and Washington counties. And my understanding is the bulk of the rest of the state is leaning heavily towards the 2-semester plan.
Including all the other big ones in the state.
That is my understanding.
Okay. Yes. And Mr. Culp, what is your personal preference on which model? I mean, you're the expert. You work with all of the coaches. I very much value your opinion on this, your personal opinion on this, or your professional opinion on this. So which one would you lean toward at this point?
So thank you for that question. I appreciate it. And like everyone in my seat, I want our kids back together. I know how important that is. And I very much miss the fact that our coaches and our club advisors and our dance company directors and everybody hasn't had this opportunity in quite some time. So I want to be clear in stating that I am fully, in support of that. Given the school system's approach to a slow and measured rollout to doing this in as safe a way as we can, and given the fact that I really believe in my heart, it's much less about how many games we can play and whether or not we can do this safely. And I know not everyone's going to agree with this comment, but I do think the 2-semester plan and starting out with these out-of-season programs is the better path forward. I think it aligns with what our school system's doing. Our local health department has supported it. I feel that's the best choice right now.
Thank you for your candidness and for sharing your honest opinion with us. Are we sticking to 2 questions per round, or can I go more? The other is sort of okay. I've been giving 2. Some of the others weren't quite doing 2. Just gonna put it out there.
No, we'll do 2. There was a little confusion because Dr. K we had to limit because of his time constraint.
Okay. Okay.
So
all right.
yeah, let's do 2. There's plenty of time to get multiple.
Great.
rounds.
I have more for next round. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Ms. Antoine.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. I would like to first start by, I was looking at the slides and I saw a slide completely dedicated to the emphasis of the considerations for what not having these extracurriculars may be doing to our students. So I would like to thank you, Dr. Lucarelli, and Coach Cook for your efforts to consider that when you were considering this plan, especially the social and emotional support that these activities allow for the students. My question would be the compressed schedule. How much is that going to cost us in terms of funding with these back-to-back seasons that are normally very demanding in a regular condition? For example, if you have a student athlete who happens to be a triathlete, that student is looking at probably $600-700 in just preparing for each one of his or her sports. So, has the funding increase been considered with this plan?
I want to make sure that I clarify the question. Ms. Antoine, are you asking, based on these 2 options, has the funding increased to support one or the other option? Is that the question?
So when I'm thinking back to how I'm delivering it and what I'm thinking in my head, it's probably not coming off the way that it should. COVID has impacted all of us financially. And with the compressed scheduling with the 2 semesters, you potentially have athletes who would be relying on parents or guardians or otherwise to support them in with parts of their uniforms, snacks, drinks, back and forth transportation as we're hearing. So wanted to understand those considerations. I also wanted to understand, there's going to be a lot of wear and tear on our courts and fields that may increase because it's now compressed rather than spread out over time. So has the funding impact been considered?
So I don't think there's going to be much of a funding impact. Condensing the seasons, in fact, logically, I would think that we would spend less in a shortened season than we would in a regular season because we'll have less contests. Fewer contests means fewer transportation. We would have to hire fewer sets of referees to call games and umpires and the like. So, and game officials. So, no, I don't think that budget is an impact. You mentioned uniforms. Those things are all should be supplied by the school. And so student athletes will have access to the same uniforms in either scenario. But I don't think the compacted season either way is impacted by budget.
Thank you, Dr. Arlo. So then I would like to ask about the hydration and sanitation efforts and also the physical requirements. Normally, for many of our athletes, sports medicine organizations come to the school and offer physicals and tests as well. Is that going to happen for the athletes this round?
Mr. Culp, do you have I don't know where we are on physicals.
Yeah, I appreciate that question. We do intend through a registration process to require physicals in both scenarios. Well, certainly in the competitive season, if that's the route that we're taking, also in these out of season workouts. While most schools are not in a place right now to, if any, frankly, to bring in what you're referencing, what has happened in the past, certainly, doctors coming into schools and whatnot. We are staying in regular communication with our two trainers groups, ATI and MedStar, and local doctors, and trying to get our athletic departments as much information that they can share with their communities as possible about physicals and where families can access them. In recent communications, even as of last week, we've had pretty good success generating a list of options, getting those out to families, and families being able to access the physicals.
Excellent. And then the physicals, would they include this time COVID testing, or is that still left up to the individual?
It does not include a COVID test. There are some additional questions related to and around COVID, and some also some informative pieces that we're requiring as an acknowledgement. But the physical itself, or athletic physical, does not require a COVID test.
Thank you, Mr. Culp. Thank you. That's all I have for right now.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Gilliland.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. Mr. Culp, it's good to see you. I saw you were sporting the Kansas City Chiefs logo a little while ago, and I grew up a Buffalo Bills fan because there was no football team here. And both are 4-0, hopefully 5-0 this weekend. But next Thursday night, one of them will no longer be undefeated. So we'll see what happens. I was going to ask a question just about college recruitment and impact on scholarships, which I know is just a big unknown. And Mrs. Ellis preemptively asked the question about recruitment, and I thought your answer was very sufficient then. I was distracted by her neon lights in the background, which I love, but nonetheless, I thought your answer then was sufficient. And again, I appreciate the plan that you have before us, and look forward to getting our sports and the extracurriculars and co-curriculars restarted. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Live.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. Madam President, as you can imagine, I have a lot of questions, so I'll just do a couple to start with. Just a few statements. Right now, there's fall leagues are going on in Anne Arundel County. Boys lacrosse particularly. Fall leagues are playing on Anne Arundel County Public Schools playing fields. Not our high school kids aren't playing there, but clubs are. These private clubs are able to play while public school kids are not able to play. They're excluded. So I look at this whole aspect of athletics going on in our high schools as a matter of equity. And we have many children that are excluded because they can't afford to pay to play. And so that undermines a lot of where I'm coming from for how we come at addressing athletics in our high school. I was really pleased to hear Mr. Drake's questions are on transportation. As Dr. Arlotto knows, and some of my board members know, in another life, many times removed, the transportation division of Anne Arundel County actually worked for me. And I am quite certain that given this task, they will be able to come up with a plan that would help us meet this transportation challenge. Same sort of thing we do for magnet schools, where there are, central locations where folks can go who have their practices at each high school. Heck, the way things are going, we're going to have a few hundred buses with nothing to do. So there could be an option of providing 10 to 12 buses to every high school to meet these requirements. I mean, the contracts are written. We might as well try and get some service out of this. So I believe that's a logistical issue. While challenging, you have the people on staff that can make that work. There's no doubt in my mind. And just like for our hybrid model that we discussed last night, that eventually some communication will go out to parents regarding if you'd be able to take your kids to school or not in order to lessen the transportation demand, the same thing can be done for athletics and for band and for theater and for dance. I see moms and dads will be more than willing to step up to the best of their abilities to help lessen that impact on our school system. I do have a question on the an outcome. That's all. I'll do one question, then I'll wait till it comes around to me again. Having to do with what is the state-approved definition of a scrimmage versus a competition?
Mr. Cole?
So thank you, Mr. Lee. A scrimmage is essentially an organized practice that can involve more than one team. No official score is kept. While it may be used to train, officials or referees or umpires, no official score is kept. There's no record kept of the game or of the event. I won't call it a game.
Okay, that sort of goes with what my ancient history of high school football is. In that, when I was growing up, we had our practices and we'd have a few scrimmages with other schools, my area of central Pennsylvania. And in fact, we charged admission to those scrimmages. And, Team A would get 10 plays with the coaches overseeing. They may rerun a couple, then Team B gets 10 plays and they overrun. They switch offense and defense. In my mind, that's a scrimmage. And in a county this large, inter-school scrimmages just make a lot of sense. Arundel High School and Crofton High School, Meade High School and Arundel High School. Those things make sense. And I think to dismiss them from the equation out of hand is premature. And I'll wait for another time around. Thank you.
Thanks, Mr. Leib. Ms. Hummer.
Yes, I love this aspect of the plan that would allow for all students to participate. The one plan that they could all participate now, and then there's also the added benefit second semester to play for the sports as well. I was glad to hear that Kazam is pushing to push that start date back to allow even more time for the kids. I'm in support of athletics and all extracurriculars for all the reasons everyone said, that it brings back, that the social interaction, especially for sports, the physical activity, and it's just, we all know these things are important for mental health. And the original plan that allows all students to come back really broadens that out to really impact more of our students than even a regular sports season would. And so I see it as an added plus for the mental health and physical benefits that we wouldn't even be able to gather all of that in a normal season. So I'm very interested in that. And then having the shortened seasons, even though they're shortened, we'd still get the competition that goes in there. I'm looking at my list of questions, and I had a big list, but I think most of them have been covered. I echo what Mr. Leib says, that I really would want to see us, to develop some sort of transportation plan, because, like I said, the benefit of these are we're going to be able to bring in more students. So the more students we can bring in, the better. And so if transportation helps that, I'd be all for that. But I think that the rest of my questions have been addressed. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Mrs. Corkadell.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. I believe these are probably going to be questions for Mr. Culp. Hi, Clayton. One is, I have been on the NCAA and the NCAA website looking into a little bit further, and they've got this cool map, I'll just tell people, that shows which states are participating and not. And I took a look at that to put it in perspective of what do I need to be paying attention to as it relates to keeping those doors open for our high school athletes. And so it looks like, about 14 are all in, and we've got, it was 4. Maryland was on the no-go map at all, and now it's down to 3 because we are now in that hybrid partial of now 35. We joined 34 other states. But in that regard, one of the things that was mirrored on all of the divisions, NCAA, NCAA, all of those cohorts, is that in the interim of and in lieu of, and recognizing that, recruiting is a nonstop process. The club students have the benefit of their club helping walk them through the recruiting and scouting videos and, quasi interviews that they're encouraging, and making sure they're keeping track of their eligibility requirements. And we know that those are an ever changing thing as it relates to how many credits in, and et cetera, et cetera. And there's talks of red and gray shirting kids in lieu of it. But it occurs to me that regardless of which option that we're facing, that although albeit partially virtual and watching, videos, that recruiting is still ongoing. So one of the ways that they're suggesting that they'll be able to compensate for those for students in the states that aren't going to be able to compete with, their neighboring state students for those prize positions of scholarships, is to create this online presence. And just like we would, I believe, with every other career. And I'm understanding that similarly in the academia worlds, that there are opportunities there. So, some kids get scholarships out of our MarkUNs and other portals, and that the virtual environment, that's more accommodating to take a video of what your robot's up to if you can't compete with it, than obviously an athlete. So the question is, are we providing the support in the interim of all of this to ensure that any student who wants to explore an athletic or another similar scholarship, dance, theater, music, we've got some of our musicians that, are going to Berkeley for, on scholarship last year. We have some incredible folks doing that. Once again, that is a much easier lift for them versus those people in team sports and engaging. So do we have something in place, and how are we making that connection to ensure that their career is kept intact, as I said, regardless of the options? Because it sounds like that's happening now, not come December or come January.
So, Mrs. Corkadell, that's, so are you asking, if you're asking if there is a centralized way that we are tracking the student athletes or the musicians or the thespians, and then through a centralized modality helping them access scholarships and talking to coaches, of course the answer is no.
Okay.
But that's the best coaches and the best theater directors and the best band directors are doing that, right? So they have relationships with their student athletes. They have relationships with coaches at various levels at different schools. And they work with their student athletes and their thespians and their instrumentalists, and they work with them as per where the student, what sort of their goals are and where that student wants to go. So that's really done at the schoolhouse level, at the team level, at the coach and player level.
Thank you. That's helpful because, part of the equity piece rattling around in my brain involves, if this is the alternative, are students well equipped to even compete in environments where they don't have that luxury of the, of the raw parent, so to speak, connecting and making sure that those connections are made. I would just suggest that, although it doesn't compare to an academic tract, that under our unique circumstances that we consider some support systems, maybe a little bit more formal to create a little bit more equity in that, to ensure that, we're not missing what could be a very simplistic, here's how to do it, video to give out to the kids or something to that effect. Because it seems to me like we're not going to get there.
And Mrs. Corkadell, if I could add, the counselors have formed a network. The high school counselors have formed a network to do college and career counseling. And they're even bringing college admissions counselors into the school day, because we put together those school day opportunity places. So there's a lot of formal and informal networking going on. And most recently, we were speaking to the head of the high school counseling, and she's very impressed with really even saying the potential for access may be greater in this virtual world for more students to have access to these people, because they don't have to go to the college campus necessarily to have access to them. So we're seeing much more of that. I don't know if Mr. Culp can say the same probably about sports as well.
And we know that thank you, Dr. McMahon. And in terms specifically of sports, I know that athletic directors do in essence, back to school nights each season. They meet with the parents, and one of the things they talk about is the NCAA eligibility center, the clearinghouse, what credits need to be earned, how the recruiting process works, the difference in recruiting between Division 1, 2, and 3 student athletes, because they're all very different. The timelines are different per sport. And I know that our athletic director spent some time with parents at the beginning, some point during those seasons, to help answer those questions and guide the parents through some of that process, along with the student athletes. Would you add anything to that, Mr. Cope?
I would echo all those comments. We have in recent years actually sort of ramped up our opportunities for coaches and athletic directors. We're bringing in vendors and other folks whose job it is to do what you're talking about to help service our schools. And some of our schools have really taken off with that. Glen Burnie High School being one, where they've brought in regularly opportunities for students and families that don't understand this process, an avenue to get that information. So I agree with you. It's a great point, and really right now is a good time for folks to be able to engage with that.
Thank you, because just from my perspective, I've been always going into this from a academic first, but when I'm looking at the outcomes, particularly of this current, graduating class year, I think I would be remiss in not recognizing the relevance and importance this is going to be as it relates to career potential. Because, and to be clear, although I'm a current band parent, I'm a former volleyball parent for the varsity team with South River. So yes, I've sat in those meetings. But I'm also bringing up the equity piece, folks, because quite frankly, I also know that the kids that were coming out of the clubs, and I was fortunate enough to have a mom that, my mother was willing to sponsor my kids through some of those travel leagues to improve my daughter's skills and my son's skills when he was involved in lacrosse, which he no longer is, not at the high school level. But I know that one-on-one we can't replicate when the price tag is in the thousands. And the rec leagues too, even if they're not sitting in the thousands right now, the core rec leagues, the $86 to get you in, to play rec, that's more applicable to the middle and the elementary. When you get to high school, at that point, you're trying out for the varsity and the JV team, and or you're participating in travel tournament level. And that very low cost, we can share equipment, which happens, to offset, and, the local community being able to support those few that cannot, don't exist here. And so my concern is driven in that, making sure that they've got the same door open as the family who can't afford that. So whatever we can do to support those efforts, I would definitely be very interested in, because and the same goes for all of the different activities. I just think this is an easier one to grab for an example, because they're probably more organized than some of the other groups. But my second question is I noticed in option 1 that we have fall sports practicing through November the 14th with interactive play occurring on February 1. From a sports health and sports medicine perspective, how are we going to keep the injury counts down and the athleticism levels up in that interim of hiatus of not about 2 months, it looks like, a little over 2 months, where they will be not doing anything at all. And as a sports fan watching football and hockey most recently, I do know that the how long they're able to practice and any gap in between those practices and the interaction can create that. What's our approach to that with those gaps?
I think our approach is in individual sport and individual coach. I'm sure would give their players, that would be sort of the equivalent of their off season between when they would end their fall practice and when they would start their competitive season. So many coaches that I'm aware of, and I did when I coached, would give those student athletes some things to be doing over the course of that time period. But there wouldn't be anything formal from us. It wouldn't be formal. It would be informal that the coaches would ask their players to engage in some off-season, as it were, training between the end of that fall sport, as you said, on November 14th, and when the fall sports would pick up later in the year or in that next semester.
Okay, I'll hold my other questions for the next round. Thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am. Mr. Smith.
I want to go back to the physicals. So, you know, in any option we pick, we're going to be starting in less than 2 weeks. And normally, under normal circumstances, you can't start playing unless you have that physical in that shows that you're fit to go. But 2 weeks, you know, seems like a short turnaround time. So waivers put out to families that say, you know, you have to show us that you're working to get it, but we understand if you don't have it right now because of some extenuating circumstance.
Mr. Colt.
Thank you, Dr. Arlotto. Thank you, Drake, for the question. I certainly appreciate that question. And I think I understand where you're coming from. We are not in a position to waive a physical out of health and safety. That's not something that I'm aware that we would want to do or approve. However, I can tell you that a number of families are, but before this started, there was a point in time not too long ago where we still thought August 12th might be a start date for sports. And while I can't give you hard numbers, I can tell you that I'm pretty confident that many families were gearing up for, and some had actually already registered for sports, because some of our registration process can be a little bit different. In many schools, we already have a slew of people that were signed up and ready to go. And I believe many of them will have a physical and allow them to quickly sign up here for what we're going to offer, whether it is the out-of-season version or whether it is the competitive season version. And for those families that don't have a physical now, we will do the best we can to give them resources, dates, contacts, but it's not my understanding that we would waive a physical requirement.
Okay, great. Because, you know, you touched on it. Yes, it's great for those parents and families that signed up, but for, you know, a ninth grader, it's your first time playing football. You know, you probably don't have that waiver in, or maybe if we go with the second plan where we just have, you know, very light practices, just, you know, I don't know if I want to do it. Test the Lord and see what it's like. They probably don't have that physical in. I just don't want it where students can't play because they just don't have a physical in, just because of time constraints. So let's say we do go with the plan where we the plan where we start in competition plan, and a student, you know, just something random, cannot get that physical in on time for tryouts. Will there be an exception made for them?
Mr. Culp, I don't believe we can make an exception. We can't allow a student athlete into tryouts unless they have the appropriate paperwork, and that would include their physical.
Okay. So I guess the best thing we can do is just really tell parents, families, get those physicals in ASAP. You know, you can't play without them. Same old, same old. But I understand. Thank you for the responses. Keeping on the topic of sports, you know, sports is not just coaches, refs, and players. You also have team managers. I know that some students, they love being a team manager. You know, they're as much a part of the team as anyone else. Will we still have team managers?
I would hope so. I hope students who still want to be team managers. Absolutely.
So will we still have them in the second semester plan when we start practices? Will they be able to, I guess, come on the practice field and I guess help the coach out, manage equipment?
Sure.
Great. And the
I don't see why we wouldn't.
Okay. The sign-ups will still be the same. You just contact. Okay.
Yep. They work through that through the coach and the athletic director.
Okay. Great. And as we know, we're in the fall, and soon it's going to start getting really cold. So when it gets cold, you know, normally I ran indoor track. You know, they run indoor track outside for practice. Kind of ironic, but and misleading. But when it got really cold, our coach wouldn't put us in for any old reason. But when it got really cold, we would move inside, right? When there was snow on the ground, we move inside to practice. But, you know, we can't have so many bodies in the building. So when it gets cold, what's the plan?
Dress warmly. It's so that is part of the difficulty, obviously, right? We're used to starting in August, and we would worry about many times in August heat acclimatization, right? And student athletes overheating. If we start in October, that's not going to be so much of an issue, but we've obviously lost time, right, Drake? And I think that's your point. We've lost time from August to the middle of August to the middle of October. So that is if we start competitive now in this month of October and we go through the season, we'll have some cold weather that those student athletes will have to contend with. And we're used to having a number of our sports go through state playoffs right through into December. That's not uncommon, particularly in Anne Arundel County, for our student athletes to compete right up through in state playoffs, the fall sports, well into the first or even closer to the second week of December.
Okay, so I guess that's your nice way of saying suck it up, Buttercup, right?
Correct. Right. We just wouldn't be able to accommodate all the fall sports inside on a really cold day. They'd have to tough it out, which I know they can do.
Well, I guess the same thing would go, I guess, for the marching bands. You know, I think I played trombone, and, you know, sometimes when it's cold, it's hard to play. So will they be able to move inside? Maybe on a special schedule, maybe they move into the gym or the auditorium where they can still maintain that social distance instead of practicing outside, just for practical reasons, just because it's hard to play in the cold. An instrument.
Yeah. So I don't know. We haven't gotten that far in planning. My initial reaction is, well, they wouldn't be able to go into the gym because you'd have volleyball in the gym during the fall competitive season, right? There might be, maybe they could go into the cafeteria and work on some of the marching, although when they're indoors, I don't think I think it would become a really high risk event for them to play their instruments indoors and in close proximity because of the airborne virus. So I would not ask our band directors to allow that to happen.
Okay. So so more plannings to come on that. That was like the first part, right? Just because we have more planning.
I'm sorry, I missed that.
I'm sorry. More planning is really to come about, you know, or.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, there's always more planning to do, but like I said, it's there is difficulty in starting a season, the fall season, 2 months later because we lose some of that really good warm weather, or we've lost it. Right. It's starting to get cold now, so that's going to be a concern, certainly.
And I will say, Mr. Smith, just from experience, my daughter was in marching band, and I sat through some very, very cold competitions, particularly when we got late in the season and we were in Hershey Park, and they all had like hand warmers, glove, you know, as they do their tactical moves on the field and practice their marching. So, yeah, it happens in all sports, but it is a activity where they do need to be spread out in practice. The moves that the marching is just as important as the instrument playing, as you know.
Okay. Well, thank you, Dr. Lucarelli, for that. Thank you. So my next couple of questions, like I said, sports.
Do we want to? You're asking lots of really good questions, but I know that Ms. Corkadell was asking people to limit to 2, and I want to make sure that we're being fair here. Ms. Corkadell, would you like him to continue, or would you like to go on to the next member of the board?
I thought I got a birthday exception.
And that could very well be in play. I don't know how the board works. You're absolutely right. That could very well be in play.
Mr. Smith, we're going to continue with the 2. I would rather defer my birthday gift to you otherwise with a card. Otherwise, I just want to make sure that all of our districts, even though we're still in transition, we all have different levels of representation, just to make sure that it's getting its equal. So,
and I hope my colleagues would just forgive my passion. When you get on a roll, they just keep on coming out. So.
Oh, I had a hard time stopping myself. I totally get it. Thank you very much for asking, though.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Miss Ellis.
Thank you. And as a football fan, I've certainly observed some very cold performances in the month of January. So my 2 questions, Dr. Arlotto, you touched on something that I'm not sure I fully understood earlier, which was you may inquire about moving up the first season to December. Did I understand? Did you say that?
So no, I'm not inquiring. The PSAM, so all the public school superintendents have written a letter to Dr. Salmon to request moving that date from that start date for the second semester plan from February 1st to December 7th. Likewise, Mr. Culp and his colleagues from around the state, the athletic coordinators, wrote a similar letter to the president of PSAM requesting the superintendents to do the same.
Okay, so how would that impact the schedule that you showed us? Because there is a 3rd session in the, I guess, practice sessions in the fall, and those would overlap. Is that correct?
Oh, they couldn't overlap. We would have to truncate them. Mr. Culp, you want to speak to that?
That's what I'm trying to understand.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Ellis. We would sort of morph and adjust the out. If we were to get to a different start date that is not February 1st, but is earlier, we feel confident we can adjust our out of season plans fairly quickly to accommodate that.
Okay, I think I understand that now. And what sport season would that be in December? Winter or fall?
If we were to move forward with the December, if a December 7th date was ultimately, at the state level as a new start date, and we tonight from this meeting, if we go with the the 2 semester plan, we would be in the middle of our fall. We have a window. Sorry, we'd be in the middle of spring. We have a window from November 18th to December 19th where spring sports will be meeting out of season.
Okay, all right. And then back to entertainment. We talking about modifications for students to be able to perform. First of all, I asked Dr. K about singers singing, wearing a clear mask, and performing. He said he wasn't aware of that singers would want to do that, but I have a student who was in a production this summer where they wore a clear mask and performed. So I guess my question is, can there be efforts to determine how others are modifying these activities to make them safer, I'm thinking, again, I know singers can wear masks. I'm betting by this point, someone has developed some sort of coverings, drapes, or instruments to begin to make those safer. So both maybe referring to colleges and other high schools, but also live entertainment venues like Rams Head, what are they doing?
I can
Can we
speak to
look
that.
Mm-hmm.
In some regard, I can speak to that. I work very closely with Jessica Valady, who's our musics coordinator, and she's provided me some of the specialized equipment you're talking about that I believe some schools have already started to order. I'll just rattle off some of the names of these things. Flute bags, clarinet bags, saxophone bags, bell cover for brass, etc.
Never heard of it, but I just figured surely someone's done it by now. Yeah. So we might need to jump on that if there's a high demand.
We have ordered tens of thousands of dollars of that equipment already, Ms. Ellis.
Oh. Wonderful. Thank you.
Ms. Schulheim.
Yes. So if we've ordered that equipment, then why can't they use that equipment and then practice? I mean, I would want them to practice outside if at all feasible, but if it's not feasible for whatever scheduling reason, then I would want the band to not take a back seat to other activities and be able to make use of inside spaces with those masks on one trumpet or whatever. So I assume they'll be distributed equitably, and then we will allow that. But then I also heard earlier, but I don't think we should be blowing those things inside. Isn't the whole point of having a flute bag or whatever to prevent the spread?
Yes, ma'am. So if you're okay with the increased risk, then that's a decision the board can make, and that's it's that simple. So they're beginning to. We've had ongoing conversations for weeks and weeks with some of the other extracurricular club activity directors, like the band directors. They've been working side by side with Mr. Culp, for example, and they'll order some of these modifications so we can get the students engaged. It's been made very clear to us that in terms of safety and health, that the more we can do outside, the better off our students are going to be, and it reduces the risk. If you're comfortable moving the students inside, where there will be increased risk, then that's something the board can decide on.
I just want them to be able to play, obviously, with outside being the preferred.
And we do too.
Right. I'm going to talk about robotics, because why wouldn't there be a meeting where I don't talk about robotics?
I couldn't imagine it.
Yeah, like I've been saying, these kids, by virtue of just showing up at an event, avail themselves of opportunities in the millions for scholarships, college and career opportunities, etc. So it's my understanding that currently we are not allowing them to build their robots inside. However, I don't see the difference between that and a Cat North or Cat South sort of situation. And so if any one of you would love to speak on this, I would love to hear it and get them practicing as everyone else in whatever way we can that's safe as soon as possible.
Yep, we agree.
Okay, so right now they're not being allowed to do that inside, correct?
Right, nobody is.
Nobody
But
is.
once we settle on a plan,
gotcha.
Once we settle on a plan, we've had this conversation before, I'll ask all the robotics coordinators to come up with a safety plan for their school. How many students, what days a week? They'll have to coordinate that with the athletic director and the band director, the drama coach, and the principal, to make sure that we don't have, again, an aggregate effect where there are too many people in the building at any one time and what space they're going to use. So they'll have to come up with a safety plan. And then, I mean, I've already been in contact with the
Powerhawks?
Powerhawks coordinator's been in touch with me, and they've already been planning, and I wrote back and said, sounds like a great plan. So we want them to be able to do that also.
All right, perfect. Were the this isn't counting as my questions, but were the lights turned out on you with the circle? They were. Oh dear.
It's we're cutting back. We're cutting back here at central office. So my office is going to go dark soon, and they cut the air conditioning off hours ago.
Oh dear. I just have one comment, and then I'll defer to my colleagues, and it's about the enthusiasm to work out transportation. I agree. We should be enthusiastic about thinking outside the box and arranging transportation equitably. And boy, that enthusiasm should also be applied to making our school hours safe and age appropriate for all levels once we get back. And so I hope that my colleagues that are so enthusiastic about getting this to be equitable for sports will also exhibit that same enthusiasm when we talk about school hours when we go back to a hybrid model, so that our elementary school students are not starting at 9:45 in the morning. And I will get off my soapbox briefly, but I will be back on this subject, as you all will expect. I defer to Ms. Antoine.
Ms. Antoine.
Thank you very much. I want to go back to some of what I asked about earlier in terms of
Ms. Antoine, I'm barely able to hear you.
Okay, can you hear me now?
That's a little better. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me give me just 1 second. Let me readjust here. Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Okay, good. So I wanted to address again, please, the sanitation and hydration efforts for the athletes, especially, and for our band members who engage in these practices. I first want to share that I'm the mom who had an athlete, a musician, a person in the band, and otherwise. Mr. Smith, you were spot on about the cold nights and the impact of the cold. So thank you for that question. My question concerns the sharing. A lot of what goes on in these sports and extracurricular activities is, one student may not have water, but they need it, and so there's this big Gatorade or some or dad or Good Samaritan brings in snacks, and they bring in water bottles. What those types of activities allowed as we move into the extracurricular efforts?
Mr. Cope, you want to talk a little bit about the hydration, as that was part of the plan you put together for the fall practices?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Arlotto. Thank you for the question, Ms. Antoine. What we have in place with the athletic plan is essentially a good faith effort for everyone to bring their own water, including the coaches, the staff, and the athlete, and in your band, any extracurricular. That would be the recommendation, with the understanding that in a case where that didn't occur, the school is going to work to provide water bottles, but no longer. It's certainly in athletics we would not be utilizing shared, what you might be familiar with, large 10-gallon Gatorade jugs, things like that would not be a part of the program. And the effort would be to communicate and educate the participants to bring their own water with them, take it back home, and do that each day.
So then I would request that we really advocate for these parent groups to get involved, parent organizations, the boosters, because the reality is, as we know, especially without those added opportunities, many of the students won't have the what they would need as they re-engage in sports and other extracurricular activities. And then I want to share with the public that Coach Cup has been engaged with ensuring a strong connectedness with the community as well as NCAA almost every year since he took on the job. I want to thank you for that. My question about these efforts, would some of that continue when we open back up, like the NCAA symposium that you host every year, and other the coaches' night? What are the plans for such activities?
So thank you for that. And yes, our intention would be to continue. We've done different versions. It sounds like you're aware of the symposiums we had a couple years ago for a few years in a row. We've sort of morphed now into more of making that part of coaches training. And we've even recently adjusted the format around professional development for coaches to include that. But to answer your question, yes, it's something I think that would always be a topic in our world in the athletic department, and I'm sure in the other extracurricular departments as well, to try to give communities and families and our coaches access to that information.
Excellent. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Antwine. Mr. Gilliland.
Thanks, Dr. Arlotto. Nothing more for me at this time.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Live.
Oh, yes. Just a couple comments before I ask a question. I got to find them here, though. A few more groups on transportation. My mind, things come clear as I get a little older sometimes. But as I recall, on half days, professional development days, and days schools are closed, students prior to COVID had to self-transport from home to school and back home again for athletics, for band, for theater, and for dance. Correct?
Yes.
So this is not a novel, unbelievably strange requirement we may be asking to help out in this transportation world.
But
cool. I like
no,
that.
sir, other than it's obviously you'd be talking about 5 days a week as opposed to
understood
once every couple of months.
But as I said, I'm confident that you and your transportation specialists can help solve that. Another interesting thing is I just saw a flyer online. And this just brings a new focus to what we're talking about tonight. The Anne Arundel County Recs and Parks. This is the same Anne Arundel County that Dr. Kaliyarama works for. They have a girls lacrosse school fall, girls high school fall, rec lacrosse, October 2nd to November 20th. Anne Arundel County can put on sports for high school kids, but Anne Arundel County Public Schools can't. And the county health officer supports that. So I see no reason why we can't proceed with high school sports in Anne Arundel County. And on the inter-school scrimmages, I understand, Mr. Culp's point about cohorts being mixed, like if it's Meade's cohort scrimmaging with Arundel's cohort. But we've mixed cohorts all summer and all fall, from all over the state and from out of state. And you can be sure that if that ended up in a spike in our infection rate and things were out of line, our health department would have been hollering, bringing that to everybody's attention. So I believe if we work this and we set guidelines, the number of inter-squad scrimmages per school, etc., we can make this to be a win-win for all our schools. Another comment. Let me see. I know I got a question. Question has to do with dance, band and music. It's just a philosophical question and point. If county rules, that means our health department's rules, permit entertainment at Ram's Head, at the casino, and in theaters. That involves dance, music, and band. There's no reason why those rules cannot permit the same sort of activities to occur in a controlled environment in our high schools. I guess that's my last point. Make sure there's no question in here. I've been writing things down here like crazy. Oh, why does MPSAA say we have to choose one or the other? You either do the October 7th option or you either do the 2-semester option. You know, that to me, and Dr. Arlotto, you and I have had this conversation before, that's a bureaucratic decision by MPSAA. No ifs, ands, or buts. Why can't that be revisited? Why is it one or none? I do not understand that approach to things. If we want to have inter-county, Arundel High School, Crofton High School, Old Mill High School, Glen Burnie High School, South River High School, all 13 of our high schools compete in our own county, then why should that preclude us in having our teams compete statewide in a statewide tournament in the spring? And I believe that is something that we need to press forward with MSDE and MPSAA. I never get that acronym right. That I don't see why that disconnects there. I don't see the practical purpose of it. Why do you think it's there?
So I'll certainly let Mr. Culp share his expertise, but I don't know, Mr. Leib, you've confused me a little bit because you stated that you're equating our competition within the county and state competitions. Nothing precludes us when we go into either one of these options, which will be competitive options, either one, our competitions will be in county. That's just the way big counties work. We always compete against each other, right?
Well, yeah, but every now and then there's an out of county.
Yeah, but that's because there could be room in the schedule, and MPSAA would allow in a particular sport to play out of county, out of league, right? But if we go into either one of these options, it's going to be a condensed version of a schedule, which means there's not going to be, I don't believe there's going to be any room to play out of county. Now, the small counties have to play out of county.
Yeah.
Kent County has one high school. Kent County needs all the counties around them to pick the same option so they have somebody to play. That's not an issue for us because we have, as you said, 13, 14 high schools that compete athletically, and we can play each other. Montgomery County, Prince George's County, Baltimore County, Howard County are all the same like that. But the small counties are not. They have a couple of high schools, and they have to play the other outside counties. We only get into the outside competition, as you know, when we get to the state playoffs. But once we start in either scenario when we're playing, if there's going to, and we'll play each other, of course, if there's going to be state competition, and that's decided by MPSAA, that's not decided by us, then we would, of course, be eligible to play. Mr. Culp, anything to add to that as far as the first part of Mr. Leib's question?
Just a few notes I wrote down while you were crafting that question, Mr. Leib. One is we can opt into the October 7th plan. I mean, we won't be going tomorrow, even if that's the way the board, the decision tonight. But counties can opt in later, just to make that clear. And I believe we could even opt out of the fall season, but opt into their winter season, as an example. But to piggyback on what Dr. Arlotto just said, we very much anticipate an in-county schedule. To go out of county at all right now would necessitate both counties allowing that, which we're not sure would be the case. And for any version that we do, because the weeks will be limited, we feel we can fill the schedule, and we would fill the schedule with our in-county games. We're looking right now, we're working on this today with some of our athletic directors. You know, a north-south division, we actually have 14, it's 7 and 7 when you put Chesapeake Science Point in there. And we feel we can do a pretty equitable and robust schedule with 2 groups of 7 for basically every sport that we offer that's a team sport.
That's encouraging.
And they play for a county championship.
That's encouraging to know, and I don't see why doing that should preclude us from competing in the spring for the state championship. It's just, it's up there in my brain.
I don't follow what this spring. So if there's going to be if we enter sports in the fall, if we start sports now, Mr. Lai, which I think you are keen on, they would be fall sports and fall sports only. The state would decide, MPSAA would decide if there's going to be any kind of state playoffs or championship for the fall season. There would not be a championship for fall sports in the spring. Because you'd have spring sports competing possibly.
I guess what I'm trying to say is, why not do inter-county? This is where you get with semantics. Inter-county scrimmage competition with the same thing Mr. Culp said with our high schools, and be able to do that in all our sports. Doing the 2-semester model.
If you.
So.
Okay. So you're advocating for the second semester model, and during the fall practice season to allow those sports to have inter-school scrimmages.
Correct.
Okay. Got it.
If I may, and Mr. Culp, please jump in, correct me if I'm wrong. I think one of the advantages of the 2-semester plan is that many more students would come out to participate in sports, as there would be no official cuts. We would have to limit the number of players. That, Mr. Live, may create where you can have scrimmages just because of the numbers who would be coming to practice right there, possibly at that very school. Am I misspeaking, Mr. Culp?
I wouldn't say you're misspeaking. No, I mean, I guess just to maybe clarify what we've put out, there are 3 4-week-long out-of-season practice schedules, 2 meetings a week and 1 virtual meeting a week. So you're talking about 8 total in-person meetings over a period of 4 weeks. Our plan does not call, I appreciate the concern, the idea, but it does not call for scrimmages across schools. It would potentially allow for inter-school scrimmages within a group of 50 kids, as an example. We're trying to keep those 50 together. The coach could very well set up a dynamic where those kids are scrimmaging within those 8 practices.
Thank you, Ms. LaCroix.
Thank you, Mr. Live. Ms. Hummer.
I have no further questions. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. Mrs. Corkadell.
Thank you. I do have a couple. I want to take us off of the sports trail for a minute here. Make sure that I understand. Overall, Dr. K had referenced the hundreds and hundreds of activities that would equitably have to start. So in other words, if we do sports, then we've got to do all the other. And I don't think there's any disagreement on the board with the necessity of how career driven even our extracurriculars are nowadays, that there's not a argument there on all of them. So I also know that he has placed recommendations not to bring them all in at the same time necessarily, because of some of those differences, whether or not we agree with them. And so I guess, how many activities are we talking about starting along with that sports schedule? Which activities are we referring to? And then and then tandem to that, and both for option 1 and 2, because it looks like there may be a difference. And then what does the schedule look like for a band that plays year round and a robotics team that's competing year round? Because we're referring to specific sports seasons, which are much briefer and more defined than a mock UN group is, or, you know, our junior, gosh, don't you hate that when a group's name doesn't come to you? I'm thinking of the junior leagues, you know, that's economically driven, where they have projects throughout the year, et cetera, et cetera. Could you explain a little bit more to me how that looks? Because the athletic association is clearly driving the sports, but the rest of it seems to be at our discretion of scripting. So I only saw the screen predominantly of what it in those options. I'm not seeing what it looks like. Help me visualize, please. You are muted, Dr.
I will certainly make an attempt. I think what we would do is we would, with the board's approval, we'll start putting out sort of the all call to the various club advisors and say, what do you want to do? My understanding is, and I think Dr. McMahon can speak to it better than I, there are a number of clubs that are operating virtually and it's just going great. There's no reason for them to come together. That's all working just great. Whatever that club is, there's no reason to bring students together because they're able to accomplish everything they want to accomplish in the virtual environment. But we would just sort of put a call out to say, with the principals, talk to your club advisors, find out what they want to do. If they want to start meeting once a week at the school, then they would have to put a safety plan together and work through their principal and then work through us to make sure that it's all coordinated. It's a coordinated effort, but we would give them the opportunity to have that choice to bring students together, develop a safety plan, and submit it and work with their principal.
So in that effort, I understand that, yeah, we do have, just like we have academically, very successful virtual environments. It's important to me for getting us moving forward with this because of the social emotional connection of that in person, even if it's 6 feet apart and with a mask on, and getting them basically, for lack of a better term, out of the house and away from a screen and starting to work towards that more interactive society that we're going to need to get back to, recognizing the duration this is going to be imposing. And I think similar to my comments last night was that that to me is a priority. And so are we, so we would offer it to all, is that what I heard? I just want to make sure I heard. So all of the clubs would have that opportunity to transition themselves out of virtual, even whether it's working or not, and go into this environment as appropriate, right?
So we could, if that's what the board wants, we could certainly do that. Let me remind you about what Dr. Kay said and talking about the aggregate effect, right? We're struggling to fill buildings with kids for academics, but we seem ready to fill the buildings in the afternoon with all of the activities. That does not speak at all to the need and necessity, but we're still in a pandemic. We still have high COVID case rates that are almost at 10.0 right now in the county. And so we have to be mindful of that. So the answer is yes. We'll offer it to the clubs and activity sponsors and ask them to work with their principals. We'll lend assistance in that planning. But we just can't have everybody on campus inside the building at the same time. That just simply doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, no, I'm in agreement with what you're saying, and I do appreciate you saying it out loud again. I guess where I'm kind of really struggling here is what's the difference between option 1 and option 2 then, as it relates to everything but sports?
Nothing.
Okay, so regardless of the board
sports,
choosing,
as I said before, sports are sports are governed by the MPSAA, and they put guardrails in to begin the athletic programs. That does not preclude us from starting to work with our clubs and activities.
So then, is the board making a decision then tonight, or could make a decision then tonight? Is it your recommendation that the board separate the proposed 2 sports options and separately vote on the others? Or is there a presumption that regardless of which option we choose, that's just going to come along? I'm trying to get a feel for where I'm eventually going to go when all these questions are over.
I appreciate the question, Ms. Corkadell. I don't believe the board needs to vote on extracurricular activities.
Okay.
I
just want to make sure that's clear, because that was not clear to me.
I've made several comments over the weeks and months that it's a priority, and we're going to start to get kids back into buildings. Athletics are separate. I need the board to make a decision tonight about when they want us to begin athletics. That decision, I think, is going to be a vote of the board. We're working on extracurriculars and co-curriculars. That's already underway and has been underway, and I've shared that with the board in the past.
Yeah, correct. I just want to make sure it's perfectly clear that we know what we're voting on. Yeah, because in the absence of not seeing it on the screen and stuff, and given the duration of our conversations, I just want to make sure that I'm getting it. Okay, so I think that clears up for me and perhaps a couple others of ultimately that's happening. So that is nothing that we need to continue to forward through. It's happening one way or the other.
We're working on it.
Tonight's decision will be sports related, and there are 2 options for the board to consider possibly if they choose. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, just want to make sure I had that clear. And that does it for me. You know, we've had a couple rounds and I keep hearing more and more, I don't have any more questions. So I think we're safe to go with hands first on the questions. We're not to any actions yet. I don't want that to be assumed. And if I have more than two hands up, I'm going to be inclined to do another round robin. I'm only seeing 2. So I'll let Dr. Arlotto proceed with Ms. Ellis and
yes, ma'am.
Mr. Smith, not in that order.
Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. And I'm sorry, I do just have to clarify that last round of questions because I am a little confused. I understand that we are moving forward with clubs and activities, but you know, you had also made the statement that there's no reason to bring students back together if they're already doing an activity that's working virtually. But I have to piggyback and fully support what Ms. Corkadell said, which is there absolutely is a reason to do that. And follow that up with, obviously there would need to be some coordination. We would not have all the students, all the activities in the school or on the school grounds at once. I would hope that we will use outdoor spaces as much as possible. But in addition, there, you know, should be different groups on different days of the week. And even there could even be seasons for some of these clubs, like, you know, let's say a theater company could be virtual for a period of time and then come together for their season to bring together a performance or something like that, just a suggestion. But obviously there would need to be some scheduling. We all agree that the safety of all involved is first and foremost. But we have to balance the benefits and the risks and ensure that we are meeting our students' needs. And this is a real need for them. I'm sorry, Dr. McMahon, were you? I'm sorry. I thought she was speaking. Okay.
We are working with the club sponsors. I wanted to assure you of that. I did want to tell you that many of these clubs, they formally have gone to virtual seasons. They are actually in a competition season right now. And our MESA students, our VEX Robotics students, and many of the other clubs, they're fully engaged. Esports, they're competing already. And so some of them may choose not to come in person right now just because the nature of the game for them is virtual. Some of them may do both, but others may choose not to go in person because their adult sponsor may not wish or be able to go in person at this time. So we have a whole lot of variables going on, but we can move forward, and we are talking with them constantly right now to talk about the notion of the possibilities of coming back.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellis. Mr. Smith.
Great, thank you, Dr. Arlotto. Are we still doing the 2 questions? I think since no one else has any comments, I can just run through the rest.
Yeah, I think you're the last, so we can go at least till midnight. So just have at it.
Great. No, it's in a birthday.
Dear God, no.
Your birthday, so just have at it.
Great.
18 questions for 18 years of wisdom.
Like, no, these should be quick. I think this first one should be a yes or no question. If you play a rec team right now, can you still play for the high school?
Right. Right now, yeah, students can certainly participate in rec sports. There's no.
No, I'm sorry. If you play for a rec team, right? You're playing in the spring season. Can you still play? You can still play for the high school.
Well, right now the high schools are playing. So which one of you help me understand? Which are you talking about? One or the other options?
Either or. You know, if we choose to just have practices or games, can you still play for the high school if you were already in a rec season? Like, you already paid for it, you know, you already have, you know, everything in, and the rec season goes till like November 1st, you know.
Right. Mr. Culp.
So in the out of season version, Drake, the answer is a clean yes. In the we're compelled to go competitive fall sports now, or October 18th, 17th. We do have some rules around designating if you want an exemption to play on a rec team while you're on you may be aware of this if you're a baseball player at Meade. You're supposed to get approval for that prior to your season starting from your principal and your athletic director. There's a mechanism to do that. It can be done, but it is different when it's a competitive season versus out of season practice.
Okay, great. The next couple questions, I guess, are about parents. The booster clubs, are they still going to operate in this new environment?
I'm sure they are. I'm sure the booster clubs are operating now. I would assume that they're operating now.
Yes, sir. We had our Southern High School Booster Club meeting last night.
All right. And then next, fans. I know not at the start, right? But will fans, I guess, be allowed in, you know, limited capacity? Maybe if there's a football game or a football practice, will they be able to, you know, watch spread out? I've seen the bleachers. You've probably seen the bleachers at Meade. They're pretty big, and I think we can definitely safely spread people out on them. Maybe not so much the gym, but for me, the bleachers make sense.
Is there some direction, Mr. Culp, on at this time from MPSAA on fans?
Thanks for that question, Drake. There is a recent directive from the Maryland Department of Health regarding this issue, and they're capping outdoor at 250 or 50% capacity of the space, whichever is smaller. Indoor is 100 or 50% capacity of the space, whichever is smaller. However, our Anne Arundel County Department of Health will need to weigh in on our circumstances in Anne Arundel County, whether we would follow the same. I can share with you that I believe Rec and Parks currently is doing 2 adults per participant. So I'm not sure if they would advise us similarly.
Okay. Well, hopefully we can get fans back, because as we all know, some of us are parents, some of us are players, and we know it's a community aspect. It builds community. And then my last question about sports: has there been any new training or guidance for coaches and referees? Any new guidance with COVID?
So I'm sorry, what was the first part of that? I missed that first part.
Has there been any new training or guidance for coaches or referees, with COVID?
Referees, I don't know about. Coaches is what Mr. Colt would be putting together.
Okay.
Mr. Colt, you want to add something? I don't know about referees, but I would assume there is.
Yes, I can add to that, Drake. Our coaches will be required, and many of them have already taken it. There's a national governing body, you may be aware of, the NFHS, National Federation of High Schools. They've put together a COVID awareness course that we're requiring of every adult that's involved in the program, from me down through the student manager, as you're mentioning. So that's an additional program, professional development piece that wouldn't have been a part of last year, as an example. And then once we know where we're going, our staff and our athletic directors will also then in very short order here meet with our coaches and provide them all the information they need on the version of the plan that we're moving forward.
Okay, great. And then my last question is about clubs. Can they meet in an off-site location? I know there's been a lot of talk about meeting in the schools and on different schedules, but I foresee that getting very hectic, very difficult to plan. But I think if they can somehow, still have a safe plan, can they still meet off-site?
We're really trying to help the clubs understand that security and safety is paramount to their existence, and really we don't want them off-site. So there's been a lot of questions asked about being at people's homes, et cetera, and we've said no to all of that.
Well, for me, I should have clarified. Off-site would be a public space, so like a library, a rec center, something like that nature, where it'd be in public, not someone's home. That opens up a whole nother can of worms.
Right. So Dr. Lucarelli looks like she wants to answer that.
Yeah, no, my concern also, and I see Ms. Jackson online as well, is the security that goes along with that, and asking, we have teacher sponsors who we pay, their responsibility going off-site, there's a liability to all of that as well. And so we fingerprint, we do all those things ahead of time for reasons, and we like to keep people on our property where we can also not only have teachers there, we usually have administrators around in case something happens. In an off-site location, that would be very hard for us to manage if there was any type of emergency situation. Ms. Jackson, did you have anything to add?
No, I think you and Dr. McMahon covered it. I would only add what has been said several times. Security is paramount to us. We have practiced security drills with our buildings for a reason. We have intricate athletic plans and security plans, as well as extracurricular plans for that reason. And so I would be opposed to affording our students that off-site opportunity because we are in a more controlled environment. We can't control everything, but it's more controlled within our buildings.
Of course, I hear everything that you're saying, but I just think that maybe you put a waiver out, tell parents up front, they're not going to be in a school building, but they still are going to be in a public place like a library, like a rec center, not someone's home. I'm not advocating for that. Just so we can still have the opportunity. Maybe it works for some students to have it at a rec center, and it won't interfere with another schedule. I know safety is our number one priority, but I just think that we shouldn't. I just think we shouldn't cut ourselves off to different opportunities, different possibilities. We're in very uncertain times, and maybe sometimes it's good to think out of the box every once in a while. But I do hear what you're saying, and I don't want to do hear what you're saying. So those are, just make sure, those are pretty much all my questions. Not quite 18, but I think it's close enough.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. I see one more hand, Mr. Leib. Oh, no. Oh, Mr. Leib.
I thought Mr. Leib was done with his questions. Yep, and he is. Okay. Doesn't look like we do have any more questions. Thank you guys so very much. I think we got a lot. We definitely got a lot out of this, and we'll be gaining more. So I have a couple members who expressed an interest in forwarding action. And so I'm taking them in the order I received them in, and that would start with Mr. Leib, and then I believe Ms. Scholheim may have additional actions to propose. And so we're going to go in that order. So Mr. Leib, we will start with you.
Thank you, Madam President. As stated in this board's resolution from last month, the board welcomes and strongly supports the continued exploration of ways to allow our student athletes, our artists and musicians, our bands, and our students involved in other extracurricular endeavors the opportunities to gather and eventually compete and perform in compliance with CDC, state, and county guidelines. The board recognizes that these activities will help maintain and enhance the relationships and personal growth that are so critical to development of well-rounded students. Ms. Antoine put this motion forward, and the motion was approved by a 7-0 vote by this Board of Education last month. In order to increase and make the opportunity to participate in athletics available to as many students as possible, I motion that the Board of Education approve the 2-semester plan, option 1, as presented by the superintendent, with a modification to strongly encourage the addition of inter-school scrimmages in the sports being conducted.
Second. Okay, we have a motion and a second, and we're going to go in round robin order, of course, and roll call order, and with Mr. Leib being last to comment as the motion maker. Before I do this, though, I do think it would be important if you would oblige me, Mr. Leib, in your motion. I think it would be important for the board to recognize the comments that were received and the quantity prior to taking any action tonight. If I could please call Ms. Howe to the table momentarily.
Very appropriate, Madam President, very appropriate.
Ms. Howe?
Excuse me, thank you. So as the public press release went out, we received 41 public comments related to athletics and extracurriculars by the 4 p.m. cutoff, which included first, last name, and community of residence. After that 4 p.m. cutoff, as of today at 4 p.m., we received 6 additional comments, which have been shared with you today.
Thank you, Ms. Howe. Okay, we're going to proceed round robin here, starting with Mr. Smith. Mr. Smith, comments to the motion made.
You can see I put my.
All right. Where is mine when I need it?
So ready to get, students of all sports, back on the field, in this one semester, and that will get me back on the field with my team. And I'm super excited. I'm really looking forward to it. And go Mustangs.
There we go. Thank you very much, sir. Ms. Ellis.
Thank you. This has been a very helpful discussion. Thank you for the presentation, Dr. Arlotto and staff. And I am inclined to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to just do a quick scan on my people list to see if Mr. Grant, okay. Ms. Scholheim.
I just want to make sure to clarify one thing on the record, and then I'm 99% sure I'm going to give my support. And this is the one that's going to start in February, but hopefully December, correct? I see
I
nodding incorrect.
see Dr. Alato nodding his head.
Competition, yes.
That's correct.
Perfect. And that's also the one that allows the off-season practices to start very soon.
Correct.
Yep. I am 100% on board. I'm glad it was your motion, Mr. Leib. It was going to be mine if you didn't make it. So you don't have two motions tonight.
All right.
Yay.
I had a feeling. I was going to originally do the normal two option,
Teamwork.
for them both. I had a feeling we were going to be okay tonight.
Yep.
Thank you.
I'm in. Let's get it done and go to bed. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. Mr. Gilliland.
No comment from me.
Thank you. Mr. Leib will be last. Ms. Hummer. I'm
yes,
sorry. I am so sorry, Miss Antwine. My apologies there. I have a lot of names scrolling in.
Thank you.
You're sitting up at the top, at the very top there, and my scroll needs me to go down. So sorry.
And my camera's acting crazy tonight, but that's at least I'm on with you guys. I support Mr. Leib. I also want to comment that we did receive a lot of input on these options and plans as we move forward from the public. So I thank the public as well for your input. But I'm in support of moving forward as Mr. Leib has presented.
Thank you very much. And okay, Ms. Hummer.
Yes, I appreciate that Mr. Leib highlighting that the resolution that we passed was to make every effort to bring as many students back in as possible. And I think that this plan does bring in the most students and give them all the opportunities and more opportunities than we'd have in non-COVID times. So I'm fully in support of this.
Thank you very much. I have no comment myself. Mr. Leib, conclusion.
I'd like to thank Dr. Alato, Mr. Culp, and the staff for their hard work in putting together these options to make it so they were clearly presented to not only us, but the public who has been listening. And I thank my fellow board members for their support in moving this forward. I think it's a good night tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Leib. I agree on the night's outcome. Ms. Howell, please call roll.
Thank you. I would like to repeat the motion.
Mm-hmm.
I move that the Board of Education approve the second semester plan option 1 as presented by the superintendent, with the modification to strongly encourage the addition of interscholastic school scrimmages. Mr. Smith.
Aye.
Ms. Ellis.
Aye.
Ms. Shalhan.
Aye.
Ms. Antwine.
Aye.
Mr. Gilliland.
Aye.
Mr. Leib.
Just a little privilege, on active duty when I was Chief Staff Officer, Destroyer Squadron 22. After an extensive operation at sea, the Commodore and I would go out on the bridge wing. And things didn't really go exactly as we planned, even though we had planned them out to the minute detail. But it always worked out. And we'd light up a cigar, and the Commodore would look at me and he'd say, CSO, Chief Staff Officer, ain't it great when a plan comes together? So that's tonight. Dr. Alato, ain't it great when a plan comes together? Aye.
Thank you, Ms. Hummer.
Aye.
Ms. Corcadow.
I don't have time to put it on, so here we go. I gotta support my family's colors. Of course, I support everyone in my district, but we don't have Crofton shirts yet. So, but I'm definitely go Seahawks, and I know the Mustangs and everybody else is going to do awesome, of course, and the Wildcats too. But I am a resounding aye.
Great. Motion passes 8-0.
Madam President, point of information.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
I am a Wildcat, but in honor of Mr. Smith's birthday. And I still love my Mustangs.
I gotta tell you, I can't see whether it was a W or a M, and although the colors were matching up, I wasn't quite sure. So I was walking with some trepidation. Great. I know all of our teams are going to really, really shine because the appreciation of our students for all this, and that's what this is truly about, is I know it's there. And so thank you all, everyone. Just as a reminder, this concludes this portion of the agenda. And before we formally adjourn, announcements are that the Board of Education will be meeting in its regular session tomorrow, starting at 11:45, in which case it will vote to immediately go into closed session and conduct its business. It will conclude, it will resume the public session. Oh boy.
Easy for you to say.
Words, I know, really, tongue-tied. Can't even say that right. At 6 p.m. And that will be our very first in-person meeting as a board. And so I know that our members are all looking forward to taking that next step. And I know now our other groups are taking that next step, and we have something in place for our high schoolers to be able to take that next step. We've got some groups already going on this week to take that next step, and we're going to keep on building it one step at a time. So thank you guys, everyone. Looking
Michelle,
forward to it. Yes,
Michelle,
ma'am.
can I ask a quick question? In all this talk, I've forgotten. So could you just clarify when, Dr. Arlotto, when will we actually be starting having kids back in on the field based on this plan we just voted for?
You broke up, Ms. Hummer. What was the first part?
When will we actually have kids back on the fields under this plan we just voted for?
Mr. Culp, I think we're going to target for the fall athletic plan for the 19th of October. Is that when we'll have the first practices? Is that right? Yes, October 19th will be the first of the 3 seasons. We'll start with the fall sports. They'll have their practices October 19th through November 14th.
Great, thank you. Just wanted to reiterate that. It kind of in all this, I kind of lost the dates from back the first hour. But thank you.
And I know that Dr. Arlotto and Mr. Mosier do an excellent job of getting that communications out, so it'll be in everybody's hands, I'm sure, very soon. Okay, this officially concludes. I'm willing to entertain a motion to close this session out.
So moved.
Second.
All right, consensus?
Absolutely.
Have a great evening, folks. We ended at 9. I'm happy.
Yay. Peace.